I am Andrew King, Editor-in-Chief of Canadian Musician, and joining us for Develop a Kick-Ass Career Plan is Jim Norris, publisher of Canadian Musician, president of NWC. Jim and I have been doing this quite a while, him longer than me, but he has spoken, given the keynote at a myriad of well-known industry conferences, trade events, etc. Taught for some very reputable institutions. He's been on the board for a number of Canadian charities, often associated with the music industry. We're thrilled to be able to leverage his expertise for this. Jim, welcome, and why don't we jump into this here? A little bit of an introduction to career planning and where we're going to take the session tonight.
Well, just one comment, I guess, is that people in general spend more time planning their holidays than they do their career and their lives. And I think musicians in particular, from what I've seen, a lot of times don't have a very solid plan. So that's what we're going to talk about. Here's a definition. You'll find this in the PDF, so you don't need to scroll all this down. If you download the PDF of the PowerPoint, you'll find that. But a few keywords in here: lifelong. You should be continuing to plan your career basically until you're dead. After that is harder. But make informed decisions. In other words, do your research, set short-term and long-term goals. And then once you've done that, take the steps to achieve the goals. And one thing with goals is try and break them down into bite-sized chunks, because sometimes goals are lofty, and it's easier if you can break them down into things that you can do every week or even every day, and then you get a sense of being able to achieve them, and you can kind of chart your progress as you go along. One note here, especially nowadays, is with any of your career plans, think globally and certainly explore globally, because it's a much smaller world than it used to be, and there's a lot of ways you can travel, or in many cases you don't even have to travel. There's a lot of parts of your career that you can do online, over the phone. So there's, just keep that in mind. Don't get too focused on your one little part of the world, because there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Right on. Again, keep the questions coming. We've got a few trickling in already. Welcome at any point here. We'll put them in front of Jim when appropriate. So we're going over 5 steps to career planning. We just went through the definition. Step 1, reflection and self-evaluation. Can you expand on that a bit for us, Jim?
Yeah, so part of that is, and we'll get into this a bit more, but part of that is just looking at yourself and your skills, and also looking at the market that you're in. You've got to do some gathering, and of course, a lot of that's easier than it used to be. Getting information about yourself sometimes is tougher to be objective, but sometimes you can get that from people that you trust. But you kind of have to figure this out first. What do you do? Who are you? And what are the areas you're most interested in? And then step 2.
Bingo. Oh, there we go.
So that's where the research comes in, exploration. And that can be on the internet, of course. A really good place for exploration is going to live events, conferences like Canadian Music Week and East Coast Music Conference. There's just tons of them, the Folk Alliance, and there's a lot of smaller events, but you can get a lot of information from that. Also, there's a site actually called 10,000 Coffees that you can join up, and you can schedule sessions with experts in the industry, possibly in person or online. And also, don't be afraid to pick people's brains. A lot of times, if you want to be a record producer, for instance, find the record producers that you respect, try and find them and ask them questions. And of course, at something like Canadian Music Week, you can find a lot of those types of people. Number 3. Right. So once you've done that, and there's no set time how long that's going to take. It's kind of ongoing. You have to make some decisions, and the key is to get a starting point. I taught at Metalworks Institute for about 11 years, and the thing there is that people came out of there with all kinds of possibilities, and I think in more cases were more confused than they went in, because they found out there was so many options. But the key is to focus in on a starting point, and then you can set some goals, like if it's to get a particular type of job or work as a musician. You need a starting point, because otherwise it's just I see resumes where it's just so scattered that you couldn't possibly achieve that, and nobody'd really be interested. So even though you may want to do a bunch of different things down the road, try and find a good place to start and focus on that. So then gaining experience, and experience is, you got to, just like Nike says, just do it. Some people kind of sit back and they wait for things to come to them, and they wait for somebody to crawl into their basement and discover them. Well, that's not going to happen. If you're a performing musician, you got to get out and perform, do as much of it as you can. If you're interested in recording, nowadays that's not very hard. So you want to do as much recording as you can, and in any of your chosen area, just do it. Get the experience. Some of it you're going to screw up, some of it you're going to get right, but experience counts for a lot. And just don't wait until you get all the experience. You got to get started and start doing things.
Nice. Simon's got a great question that I can toss in here.
Sure.
Undoubtedly, there are some situations where you may be doing unpaid work in exchange for the value you get from having that experience, having that professional association. There's also sharks in the water, people looking to take advantage of free labor. Can you offer any advice for people on, I guess, how to tell if an opportunity that may not come with financial compensation is going to be worth their while?
Well, there's two reasons to work for free. One is the learning that's associated with it. So obviously doing something you haven't done before, that's a learning experience. You can almost treat it as an extension of your training or your school. The second reason to work for free is it's a promotional opportunity. So if you get to intern at a record company, for instance, assuming you do a good job, you're going to get to promote yourself to the people you're working for, the people outside of the company you're working for. So that's the other part of it as well. So that's, that can be worth a lot of money. I think the main thing is you just have to evaluate what it is you're going to have to do, what you get, what the person giving the opportunity gets. And, there has to be a goal in that too. It can't go on forever. There has to be a point at which your experience is going to turn into something that pays you some money. So and I think you have to, if you're working for somebody in that opportunity, then you have to get that straight in the first place. You're going to work there for 6 months, and in that particular company, is there an opportunity to go on from there and become a paid employee? We've certainly had interns over the years that have turned into employees. So it does happen. So that if you get those things straight, if it's all vague, then it's not going to be a worthwhile experience.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thanks for the question, Simon. And 5 steps of career planning, 5 on 5 implementation.
Yeah. So that's, taking what you've come up with and putting it into place and getting it to work. And one key with any kind of plan is that you have to be able to update it. And that doesn't mean lessening your goals. It just means changing the path to get to your goals. Because sometimes you'll try things, you'll have your plan all sorted out, and some things work, some things don't work. Some things take longer than actually almost everything takes longer than you think it will. So, but you have to get started. You have to put it in place, and then, as you go along, you may have to change it so that it works better.
Right on. Okay, so next step here, setting goals. Love, the SMART breakdown. Consider what you want to achieve and then commit to it. Take it away. Yeah,
most people really don't have any goals. That's the reality of it, or they're so vague. So the key here is that they have to be specific, measurable, attainable. Sometimes it's good to have goals that don't seem attainable. They might just be a bit above your head, and they have to be time bound. In other words, they have to have a time frame attached to them. Yeah, the main thing is you have to be able to visualize it. So if it's getting a record deal, let's say, or if it's becoming a platinum record producer, you have to be able to visualize it, and then even the smaller goals or smaller steps, cross them off your list as you work through them. Another important thing is to balance personal and professional goals. If you have a family, obviously that's a consideration. And if there's somewhere in the world that you really want to live, like right now, certainly I would like to live somewhere warm. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But I had one student, and she had two goals. One was she loved Latin music, and she liked being warm. So that wasn't very hard. I hooked her up with some people in Miami, and off she went. And those were, one was a sort of a personal goal, and the other was more of a business goal. But don't put down your personal goals because they're important. It might be where you want to live. It might be the culture of where you want to work and the type of people you want to work with. It might be that you want to travel, which comes with a lot of careers, and those are just as important as your professional goals.
Right on. So yeah, product development. Interesting to hear how this fits into the topic, but let's break that down. And this one, I guess I can mention too. Borrow some content from Jim's very well-received Self-Promotion 101 session. Again, nwcwebinars.com. You can access that one, all the other ones for totally free. That really dovetails nicely with what we're talking about here, but product development.
So in the context of marketing, which is what I taught for several years, there's what are called the 4 Ps, and one of them is the product. So even though you might be an artistic person, you have to think of yourself as a product, and there's a number of reasons to do that. Certainly, if you're signed with a major label, those companies certainly think of what you do as a product. So you might, if you're working for somebody, you might supply a service. Your employer, or it could be your customer, has to resell that as a profit, and a lot of people have trouble with that. And that whatever it is income you want, somebody has to be able to resell that at a profit. If you're playing in clubs, at some point they have to be able to make more than they're paying you in revenue selling beer or at the door or somewhere. And if you're working in a company, they have to be able to resell your efforts and make a profit from it. So that's kind of a hard reality, but it's true. So there's 2 ways to develop a product. One is to develop a product just because you want to, just because you like it, something you're committed to, and then find a market for it. The second way is to find a market and then develop a product for that particular market. Now, the reality is it's probably a little of both of these. The one that's, in my mind, much more self-fulfilling is the first one, to develop a product, something you're passionate about, and then you'll find a market or it'll find you, and that there's just more passion involved in that. So a number of things that can be part of your product. Some of these are really old-fashioned. One might be talent, obviously, certain skills that you have to develop, having multiple capabilities, in other words, being able to do more than one thing. Experience is part of it. And, of course, you have to go out and do that. Might be study. It might require studying. Use of technology, which is kind of hard to avoid nowadays. So the better you can endorse that, the better. Sales skills. And for a lot of people, that just turns them off completely. But you certainly have to be able to sell yourself to a booking agent, to your banker, to anybody, really. Even if you're trying to convince other people to join your band, you have to be able to sell them. Image is very important. And that, obviously in the music industry, your image is how you appear to other people. That's also in marketing known as your brand. So whether it's a product, whether it's yourself, there's a certain impression that people have, and you need control over that. And then also your attitude, and that's not a question of a bad attitude or a good attitude. It's just the way you look at things. Sometimes things go wrong, and many times you can find a way to look at that that's positive, and that you can turn it around and make it into something positive. So, working on your attitude, the way you see things in the world, is really what attitude's all about.
Right on. Yeah, still some great questions in the queue. We will take up shortly. But again, if you've got a question related to something that we're talking about now, send it in. I'm going through them all, and we'll make sure that it gets in front of Jim in a timely fashion. So a few more points on the note of product development.
Okay, so some of these are skills, I guess. Being on time, kind of basic, but some people seem to have a problem with that. Personally, if somebody's coming to see me, I want them to be here about 5 minutes before the appointment. If they're here 2 hours ahead, that's not good. And certainly if they're late, nobody appreciates that. So developing that skill, cooperation, just being the type of person that's cooperative, that's not just a pain in the ass anytime you're trying to get something done. Flexibility is important, just to be flexible, because sometimes things don't go the way you think they're going to go. Going the extra mile, always outperforming and giving more than people expect is the way to do it. Likability, you wouldn't think that would be a skill, but for some people it is. Some people are very natural at being likable. Some people are very natural at being unlikable. And there's actually a book and a lecturer, can't remember his name right now, but he has a book called The Likability Factor and just how important it is. And then social skills, and that is a skill. Some people are, I usually ask at live events that I do, how many people are shy. Most people don't put up their hand, and I usually say, well, they're too shy to even put up their hand. So, most people are shy to an extent, and that's a skill. It takes practice. If you're at an event, one hint there, if you're at a conference, for instance, try to go with somebody who's really good socially, and they can do that part of the work, meet people, talk to people, introduce themselves, introduce you. But it does take practice. It's nothing else. But in entertainment-related industries, especially, having social skills are really important. So Dubai, you might wonder what that's doing in there, country and area in the Middle East. But that's an acronym for don't you be an idiot. Sometimes for idiot, I substitute something else. But there's certain people that they're just idiots, and you don't want to be one of them. And in the industry, there's kind of a filter built in for that. And if your reputation is that you're an idiot, certainly of all the hundreds of students I've taught in the past, some were idiots. So if they use me as a reference, that filter is going to grab them. And if they go somewhere else, again, that reputation is going to get them. So your reputation is super important to establish it and guard it, and just make sure that you're known as competent and all of these different characteristics. Because once you blow it, it's very hard to reverse it. You almost have to get a disguise or something, because once people know you in a certain way, it's very hard to reverse that and try and change their mind. People are unfair in a way. They tend to go by first impressions, and in many cases, it's hard to fix that. So make sure that you guard your reputation. And
I often quote you on this one, Jim, but on that note of reputation and first impressions, the old saying of it's not who you know, or it's not what you know, it's who you know. And yeah, as Jim often says, it's who you know, but it's also what they think of you. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Some people, that's the old expression. It's not what you know, it's who you know. But it's not only who you know. If all of those people that you know think you're an idiot, then you have a problem. And one thing we're going to talk about here is networking. But if you're a jerk, the more you network, the worse your situation gets, because all the people that you network with just think you're an idiot. So you got to be careful that your reputation is guarded.
Right on. So yeah, product development. Now that we've got a product, an idea of what our product is, and ready to take it to market, all in quotes, because in some cases you are the product, but promotion.
Yeah, first off, you have to make sure you've actually got something to promote. we see a lot of artists, we see a lot of people in the industry, and in many cases, they're just not ready. And if you pull the trigger too soon and you get out there, and either you're just bad or just not ready, you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, that doesn't mean you have to wait forever, but just make sure there is something to promote before you get out there, before you get on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the different things, because in many cases, you're just not ready. The markets that you're looking at, assuming you're in the entertainment market, which you probably are, most of those opportunities are hidden. So that's something you have to remember, that you're not going to find, if you're looking for a job, for instance, you're not going to find most of those on you're not going to find them on LinkedIn, you're not going to find them on Indeed or any of those places. They tend to be hidden, especially the good ones. So you have to do a lot of research. So the job search, you have to get out there and make phone calls. That's, sending out resumes by email is just a waste of time. One of my best students ever, who's become very successful, when she left the course, that's what she was doing. And I just said, you know what? I told you not to do that. And you got to get out there, put together a list. If you want to work in a recording studio, for instance, and you're in Ontario as an example, you want to call every recording studio in Ontario. So a lot of work, and you just want to see what the opportunities are, what you can offer to them, see if you can get an interview, make sure you have a resume that offers something to the person reading it, and that the things that are in there are relevant in some way. Now, they may not be exactly relevant to that job, but a lot of opportunities and a lot of experience that you have can be applied to any kind of position. Interviews, again, be on time. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but appropriate for the person you're seeing. That might be pretty casual, or it might not be. It might be dressy, but you want to be, if you're in doubt, it never hurts to be a little bit dressy, a little bit too dressed up. You have to look for these opportunities both online and offline. So you certainly should be looking at LinkedIn and all those opportunities, but also offline, again, at events. If you go to an event like Canadian Music Week, or if you're in the audio area, which I know some people are there, going to some of the Audio Engineering Society meetings, there's just, that place is just filled with opportunities, trade shows in Canada and around the world. So some of the things you should have is you should have a biography, you should have a photo, and try and get somebody with a real camera to take your photo instead of doing a selfie with an iPhone. References are good, so people that think highly of you, and they might be employers or people where you went to school. A video, if it's relevant, again, try and do a better quality video, not just the worst thing imaginable. Business cards, even though that might seem passé, you still need to have business cards. If you're at an event, you can get those done really inexpensively. You might want to have a website. Create a website is very inexpensive. You may want to advertise, possibly. Sales, again, personal selling, we mentioned before. Certainly being on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on YouTube. Basically, if somebody does a Google search and you don't exist, that's kind of a bad sign. Or, if what they find is something really bad. But so you want to be, you want to be in these places, but you want to make sure that the content is positive and that there's some traction. If you have a Facebook page, for instance, make sure you have a sufficient number of likes, because it's very public. And if you've got 12 or something, you don't have any traction. So you got to work on that a bit. Networking is super important to get out, get to events, get to where you can meet the people that are involved in what you want to do. And, again, work on your social skills. And sometimes it's just a question of getting past your shyness, going up to somebody, introducing yourself, and develop the ability to ask questions. It's very powerful, and it takes the pressure off of you. So you can ask people questions, find out what they do. People like to talk about themselves, and then you'll find out more. And a lot of times, by doing that, you'll run into opportunities. It happens all the time. One of the students at Metalworks won a opportunity to go visit Randy Lennox when he was at Universal, and he went in to see him, and they did the hours session, and Randy hired him, like right on the spot, sent him down to human resources and just hired him. Now that happens rarely, but obviously he must have made a good impression. So, and that kind of thing does happen once in a while.
Right on. From promotion to persistence.
Yeah, this is the most important key word there is, and it's one that most people fail miserably at. So never say die. And part of that is, they always say you should have a plan B. In my mind, you shouldn't have a plan B. You should have a plan A. There's no plan B. You just have one plan, and you never give up until you're dead. So one thing in all of that is dealing with negativity. You may have people in your life. You may meet people. You may read about people that are negative about what you're doing, and you have to kind of just, and they may be your family. So that's difficult if it's your wife or your cousin or your parents that are very negative about what you're doing. It's hard to deal with that, but you have to just put that out of your mind. Persistence, pleasant persistence is important. You can't be just a major pain where people don't even want to hear about you again. But again, same thing. You have to be pleasantly persistent, and then you'll get a lot further with that. Enthusiasm, sometimes it's hard to have, but you have to find a way to psych yourself up, make yourself enthusiastic. Numbers game, everything in marketing and sales is a numbers game. In many cases, it's a small number of successes out of a lot of attempts. So you have to recognize that that's just the way it is. Follow-up, very important F word. So once you've had an interview, as an example, you have to follow up. When I interview people, I tell them that I will be calling them in a week, and I'm not going to call them in a week. That's a test. I'm waiting to see if they follow up with me, because in our company in particular, in most companies, you want people that do follow up. So that's super important, but again, done pleasantly. Recognize that failure or missteps are part of the process. If you're Babe Ruth, one of the most famous baseball players of all time, he was the home run king, and he was also the strikeout king, because he just swung at everything. Failed a lot, but also was very successful. And successful people fail the most. That's just the way it is. But out of all that, they also succeed the most. Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, phonogram, number of other things, he tried 10,000 times before the light bulb worked. So that's a lot of persistence. But obviously, he changed all of our lives because he was so persistent. People around him were negative. They all just told him to give up, but he didn't. So there's a lot of cases of that kind of persistence. So very important to be persistent.
Right on. Question here, I guess I'm kind of building off of someone else's question.
Sure.
But in balancing those two ideas of never say die, but then on the note of pleasant persistence, like we're talking about your reputation, how do you balance, like if you're trying to get someone with influence onto your side, or for any reason trying to get something from somebody, how do you decipher whether you're being overbearing, obnoxious, where it might be something that's hurting your reputation or standing, versus being persistent and working towards that goal? I realize it's kind of a unqualifiable dark art, but do you have any suggestions?
Well, it depends how you do it. I mean, what I suggest is you have to sort of turn it back to the other person. And if you have an interview, for instance, you call them back and say, have you made a decision yet? And they say no. And then what you should be saying is, when would you like me to call you back? Now, if they say never, then you might have to wait a couple of weeks. But it's really up to them. They might say, well, I haven't had a chance yet, but call me in a couple of weeks. So would Wednesday, the 31st be a good day? And they say yes. So then when you call back, you say, you asked me to call you on the 31st, which they did. And if you do it that way, they're going to let you know if you're pursuing something that's not pursuable. But I found in my 40 years of selling, I don't remember, and I'm very persistent. If somebody has to die for me not to keep going, I've never had anybody take exception to that, because again, it's pleasant persistence. It's based on their needs, not mine. And again, it's pleasant. And that's basically what it, if you have to make sure that you're pursuing their needs, not yours. So if you do your research and you know that company needs a certain type of person, then and I've had some experience with that, quite a bit of it actually. And them being persistent wasn't a negative. It's just how they do it, and it has to be the needs of the person that's being pursued, I guess, is the important part.
Right on. Okay. So here we go. We've got a few points to go over here. Some great questions in the queue right now. If you've got anything though that you want to put in front of Jim, whether it's relevant to the conversation or even under the umbrella of the topic, maybe something we haven't touched on, please fire those off in the coming minutes. But let's wrap it up with a bit of an overview here.
Okay, so in your career search or career plan, you're going to get frustrated. And a lot of times people think that people that are successful don't get frustrated. The reality is that really successful people get frustrated more because they have much more to be frustrated about. But the thing that they have learned is how to deal with frustration. But you will get frustrated. You'll get upset at yourself. You'll get upset at everything, people. But the key is how you deal with that, not whether you are frustrated or not. The market that most of us have chosen, the entertainment market, is relatively small in the scheme of things, and there's a ton of competition. Having said that, there's high potential gains, both personally, I guess creatively would be part of that, and possibly financially. There are people certainly in the entertainment industry that do very well financially. So another P is passion. So it's very important to make sure you are passionate and that you're doing something that makes you passionate, and that you combine that with persistence. The reality is that most people won't succeed. You just have to make sure that you're one of that small percentage that do. So make sure you are successful.
Right on. Sandra has some kind words. Thanks, Sandra, for joining us. Share that a bit later. So for questions, here's a really interesting one. What are some ways to keep your intensity and drive going after going to a series of post-grad schools and summer programs? It was a real shock to go from being told where and when to be with what items prepared to absolutely nothing. If one doesn't have contracts or other projects right away, it can be a real problem for some. Maybe we can extend that if I'm not getting too grand here, but like even after this session, it's often the case you hear information, you get energized, you're ready to grab the world by the horns. How do you maintain that drive and level of inspiration to keep yourself going forward after, whether it's a session like this or years of grad school?
Yeah, it's very common. In my experience with students at Metalworks, they go through that time. It's very difficult. It's a lot of hard work, and in many cases, they go into a slump right after that because they're tired. They've had it. They don't know what to do next, and recognize that that's going to happen. But so maybe take a break. If you have the money, take a holiday, go lie in the sun for a week, and just kind of take a break, let it wash over you, and then, come back and get a start. And that's really what it comes down to. The main thing with educational sessions like this is that you have to just distill it down to a few things, because even what we've covered here is too much to digest. So if you can write down even 5 things that you're going to do in the next week, even 2 things, and write those on your forehead. Just write them somewhere, and then make sure those things get done. And that might be to make 50 phone calls. That might be one of the things that you're going to do, but get it distilled down to action, the things you're going to do, not just a whole bunch of, I've been to a lot of trade shows and a lot of seminars, and you tend to come back with bags full of information, and then 4 years later you find all that stuff. So the key is, get out a notepad, write down the action things you're going to do right away, and things that are easy, things that you can do quickly, and things that are going to motivate you. And sometimes that's having a somebody, and certainly, in my teaching experience, I've done that. A lot of cases where I've coached people to an extent and give them a little kick. So sometimes there might be somebody in your life that can do that, and people that are motivating, and then that'll keep you going. But recognize that certainly you're going to have ups and downs and lows, and that after anything that's inspiring in any way, you're gonna go kind of through a little slump, because you wake up the next morning and you're in the midst of all your daily life, and you want to make sure that all of that information and inspiration doesn't just completely disappear.
Right on. Thanks, Jim.
And another thing too, I don't know if they're at the end of this, but my email is there, I believe, and so is Andrew's. And if at any time you want to email one of us, you can do so. If you tell me that you came to this webinar and you want to ask me something, I'll answer your email.
Right on. Here, let's put those up once more. There are our email addresses. And I'll leave that up while I ask. This is an interesting question. If you've identified your career goals, you're looking to gain experience, and whether it's an internship or even a paid position, if you've got an opportunity to work for an employer, but you know ahead of time that it's more of a stepping stone on your career path than anything that you see yourself doing long term, do you advise being transparent with the employer or colleagues about that? Or could that potentially backfire?
It depends. I think if it's an internship, that's okay. If it's a full-time position, I would keep that to yourself, because people don't want to hire people that are going to leave, and they don't want to hire people that are going to make use of their position there to get something better. I mean, all employees realize that may happen, but when you hire somebody, you hope that they're going to be there a long time. So I think it's better not to make that clear.
Makes sense. Good advice. Here, another interesting one. Now this comes, I'm assuming, specific to an artist, like someone, working to make a career as an artist in the industry. But if an artist has a handicap, whether physical, mental, or both, it's often harder to succeed due to stigmas, even though we've made a lot of progress on that front. Bell Let's Talk just happened. A lot of major popular artists have stepped into the spotlight to be honest about their struggles. All this to ask is there a way to let people know about your situation, about these challenges when applying for contracts or grants or opportunities, where it doesn't come off as needy or weak or diminishing to one's talents? Great question, Jackie.
Well, I think you have to make it clear to people that despite whatever issue you have, that you can do what's required. And I mean, everybody has issues. It doesn't matter who it is. Everybody has things that they don't do as well as they should. And certainly in parts of the industry, being a female could be considered a handicap. Certainly going back a lot of years, being other than male and white could be considered to be a handicap. And some of those things have disappeared. But, I think you have to make up for it. Certainly with a lot of females in the corporate world, they've had to work harder and be better at what they do than their male counterparts and prove themselves. And I think if there is a disability of some sort, then you have to work hard at making up for that in other ways. Certainly people that are blind, there's a long history of people that don't have sight that are very successful. And in many cases, they're even better at music in many cases because their sense of hearing is better than somebody with sight.
All right. Unless we'll take a few seconds here if anyone wants to put anything else in front of Jim. Otherwise, yeah, we had our email addresses up there. For a little bit more follow-up, remember to grab those handouts while you can when the session closes. Well, I guess you can email us to get them, but take advantage now of the opportunity. I mentioned earlier, musicbooksplus.com, our sister company. If you go to musicbooksplus.com/webinars, you can take advantage of a discount for anyone attending here. Also get a list of tips on how to take the information that we've shared here and put it into action. And yeah, a selection of 3 music business titles that I suppose just branch out from our topic here, and ones that we recommend, endorse, are very popular titles on the site. As I mentioned when we were getting started, you'll get an email just for registering. It'll automatically come to you with a link to the recording here. Feel free to share. Feel free to come back, revisit as often as you need to. We're reachable at any point. And ta-da. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Jim. And yeah, it looks like the question queue is clear. Any parting notes?
One thing just to add, if you happen to be at an event that we're at, and we're at Canadian Music Week and IMSA Festa and a lot of these events, make sure you come and see us. We have, we're exhibiting at Canadian Music Week as an example, so don't be shy. Come and see us, say hello, and in many cases we'll point you in the right directions, introduce you to a few people, and we're at a lot of other events as well. But that's one really important one if you're in the music and entertainment business.
Right on. Yeah, we take a lot of pride in being the conduit between a lot of moving parts in the music industry. And as the session exemplifies here, high tide floats all boats. We're invested in your success, appreciate the support, joining us here. That's a great first step in supercharging your drive and taking your career to where you want it to go. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will sign off here. Remember, nwcwebinars.com, where you can check out all of our past sessions. Get registered for the next one in February, late February, the 21st. We're going to be joined by Paul Kohler, the drummer and manager for long-running rock outfit Silverstein, sharing tips from the road. If you are interested in touring, even if you've done it a few times, Paul and Silverstein have been going hard for over 15 years, toured the world, and he's going to have a ton of tips on how to survive on the road and how to thrive on the road. So if touring is on your career plan, wink, wink, join us for that one. You can see our other sessions. Thank you. I'm Andrew, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician. Heard from Jim Norris, and we'll close this one out.
Thank you.
Right on.